Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Dr. Dawson, and today we are going to talk about taking care of baby rabbits. Now, the reason that I'm talking about this subject is one of my subscribers, whose name I'm going to put on the screen here, has asked me to do a video about baby rabbits. So I was like, I wonder what particular topics they're wondering about and all of that. So I started doing a little bit of looking into a lot of the common questions that seem to be asked about baby rabbits. And most of the questions seem to stem from abandoned baby rabbits or orphaned baby rabbits. And so I really wanted to kind of go into this whole topic here. And so today's video is primarily about orphaned baby rabbits. For rabbits that are not orphaned, I don't usually recommend doing too much for them as long as they are healthy. If there's any question of if they're eating enough, if they are, hydrated enough, if they're getting enough nutrition, make sure that you contact your veterinarian, as they will be able to advise you a lot better than I will, because the circumstances may be different for each individual case. Obviously, number one thing is, if mom is possibly going to be able to take care of them, let mom take care of them. If mom is not able to take care of them, if something happened during birth, if she passed away, if something else happened, then that is unfortunate, and we'll get into how to take care of those orphaned rabbits here in a second. I wanted to make one other quick caveat here. Do not, if possible, ever pick out what you think are abandoned baby rabbits that are wild. And the reason that I say this is that wild rabbits, especially here in the US, they only feed about once a day, and you may not ever see mom go in or out of there. And so basically I would say leave them alone unless you know for sure that the mama rabbit was basically killed. So don't touch them, leave them alone, and leave them be unless you know for sure. Most of the time, these abandoned or orphaned baby rabbits end up dying if they're brought into a household, or if they're brought into even a rehabber who is, very well established and knows what they're doing. Now, in captive rabbits, which is what I'm going to focus on, so these are going to be our European breeds of rabbits primarily. They typically only feed once a day, the babies do. And this is normal for them. They're only going to feed for 4 to 5 minutes a day. And the reason that we can get away with this, and the reason that they get away with this normally, is that the milk that is produced by the mama rabbit is actually extremely nutritious. And it's the most nutritious milk known produced by mammals. So it's the milk that is extremely high in caloric content, and it can be very hard to reproduce this if we're trying to replace it. Now, when you're starting to do some fostering, your mom rabbit dies, or she has 10 or 12 kits and can't take care of all of them, and so you have to bottle feed a few, right? So taking care of these baby bunnies is important. Now, the things that we need to keep in mind is that they need to stay warm. And the way that we're able to keep them warm is kind of in 2 or 3 different ways. You can use a heating pad, but the challenge is that it's very, very easy to burn them because they have such a thin skin. So making sure that you have multiple layers of material between that heating pad and their skin is extremely important. And making sure that it's not going to go above, somewhere around 90 degrees. Because if it does, you're going to burn them, and it's going to be extremely ugly and hard to take care of them. Now, the other thing is feeding. So what type of milk replacer should you use if you need to? Well, the answer is typically considered kitten milk. So this is going to be milk for cats. Don't use puppy milk replacer. Don't use cow's milk. If you absolutely have to, if you don't have another option, you can get away with using goat's milk. If you are going to use goat's milk, and some places I've read actually recommend using this as well if you're using kitten replacer, is adding some plain heavy whipped cream, or heavy cream, is adding plain heavy cream to the milk replacer. And search online, or I'll leave it in the description, of how much you should leave here, or how much you should mix in. And the reason that you mix this in is it adds caloric content by increasing the fat level of the milk naturally. Now, when you're feeding them, you can kind of tuck them in your hand with a blanket, whatever. They typically eat upside down normally, So you need to get a feeding syringe. You can get this at your local pharmacy or your local veterinarian. They typically won't drink out of a bottle, so syringe feeding is usually necessary. Now, things to remember when you're syringe feeding a baby rabbit is that if you go too fast, if they are basically not swallowing what you're putting in their mouth, they most likely are going to aspirate that milk, meaning it's going to go into their lungs, and they're not going to be able to process that. They're going to get pneumonia, and they're not going to make it. Rabbits are unfortunately pretty difficult to keep alive if you are having to bottle feed them because of the challenges of keeping them warm enough and keeping them fed appropriately, especially in that first 10 to 14 days where they really are extremely reliant on you for their care. Now, while you're doing this, feeding them with a syringe, just a tiny, tiny little bit at a time in the mouth, and letting them swallow it before you continue going. When you're starting to feed them, you may have to do multiple times a day. And you can find a feeding chart for how much they should be getting each day for an average size bunny. You can find that chart linked down below in the description. Now, while you're doing this, you will also want to wipe their butt. And the reason that you want to do this is that it's basically mimicking the mama rabbit who's going to lick them in order to stimulate them to urinate and defecate. If you don't do this, oftentimes they'll kind of get backed up and are not going to make sure that their body knows how to do those functions normally. And sometimes it may be very difficult to get them to do this in the future. Now, starting usually around day 10, this is where we can start to introduce some hay and some pellets, as basically let them start to chew on it and nibble on it. As day 10 is about when their eyes typically are going to open, they won't be able to rely solely on this, and they're going to still need to be fed milk until they are about 8 weeks of age, at which point you can wean them over a period of 5 to 7 days. Now, when we think about these pellets, we want them to be nutritious, alfalfa-based typically, and then you want to do some sort of Timothy hay or some other longer stemmed hay to kind of start to get their gut moving. Now, if they're not with mom, one of the other very, very important things about rabbits is their gut health. And if you want to learn about GI stasis, you can look up at this video. And the reason that I mentioned the GI stasis video is that when these rabbits are not being exposed to their mother, who has a very normal, flourishing amount of GI bacteria that's helping to digest all of these plant proteins and all of this cellulose, all of these things that are extremely hard for the body to digest on its own, then they're not going to get that bacteria. And so we want to also consider something for probiotics for these guys. Now, typically it's recommended to use straight acidophilus, and this is a type of probiotic that you can typically find at your grocery store, pharmacy, health food store, something along those lines, and just ask for plain acidophilus. And if you can find the acidophilus that is more in like a grain form rather than in a powder form, both of them will probably come in capsules. You can mix this in with your milk when you mix it and kind of make it. And this is going to help us start to establish that healthy gut flora that's going to allow them to digest these plant materials, the cellulose, the fiber that's extremely hard for the body to otherwise digest. So I just want to reiterate, if you find baby bunnies, be extremely cautious about going and picking them up and taking them out of where they are. Often you're not going to see the mother. You're not going to see her because often they're just out and about and they only come back once a day for a matter of a few minutes, and then they're gone again. And so keep that in mind, that if you don't see the mama rabbit, that doesn't mean she's not there. Yes, it's okay to keep an eye on them, but just be cautious. Because a lot of times taking them out is going to cause more harm than it is going to do good for them. In today's video, we basically talked about what we needed to know about baby rabbits. If you guys have specific questions, leave them down in the comments and I will either answer them down there or make a separate video if there's enough content to do it. If you haven't already, make sure you guys like and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. And if you already are subscribed, make sure you hit the little notification bell. And the reason that we want you to do all these things isn't just because I'm greedy and think you only ought to watch my content, but it really helps drive engagement for these videos, which is going to make them far more promoted on YouTube. And hopefully our goal here by the end of the year is to make it to 100 subscribers. I honestly don't know that we're going to make it at the rate that we're growing, but if a lot of you guys who are watching my videos would subscribe, it would be fantastic, as about 80% of my viewership right now are people who have not subscribed to the channel. So trying to get that number up, and I really appreciate you guys and hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day.